Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirk, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 5 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to the quarterback and tight end positions, beginning with matchups, talking about which defenses thus far this season on average have been allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks and tight ends so that we can identify the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. After which, we'll talk about my top 16 tight end and quarterback rankings, sharing with you guys my thought process and opinions regarding these players, and of course presenting statistics to justify their current rankings as we approach week 5. Remember, there are timestamps down in the description of the video for those of you who are looking for a specific player. Additionally, rankings are always subject to change. Between now and Sunday, there can be a multitude of injuries that are presented that could absolutely adjust the overall rankings. So for those of you who are trying to stay up to date on my latest rankings, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a fantasy football championship. Tonight, after the Thursday night game between the Chicago Bears and Washington Commanders, I'll be live streaming here on the channel if you guys have any questions regarding week 5 trades, anything of that nature. Additionally, tomorrow we'll have a rest of season rankings video in regards to all 4 primary positions. I'll also include rest of season strength of schedule within said video. Saturday we'll have a live stream. Sunday morning we'll have a live stream starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time prior to the London game. Again, be sure to subscribe. Help us get to our goal of 80,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for the incredible support you guys have shown thus far this season and going forward. Thank you very much. Also, reminder, for those of you who are trying to stay up to date on my rankings, another way to do so besides subscribing to the channel, perhaps checking out the Patreon, you can also go ahead, travel down to the description of the video and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, for those of you who go ahead and sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you eligible for the first-time deposit match up to $500, but you're also going to get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning from my email directly to yours, which includes by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, flex rankings, all-encompassing rankings every single Sunday morning. So regardless of what you're doing on Sundays, you'll have my rankings and an advantage upon your league mates for the remainder of the season. Be sure to check that out today. For those of you who are, of course, trying to draft teams via Underdog Fantasy, put together some pick'em slips, and of course, take advantage of this opportunity. Check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility, and of course, draft responsibly. Thank you very much for the support. All right, let's get into talking about our Week 5 quarterback rankings, and let's talk about matchups first and foremost. Again, matchups give us a little bit of an indication as to some of the players that are kind of on the fence as to whether or not we're going to play them, giving us a little bit more confidence potentially based on said matchups. Now remember, teams like the Los Angeles Chargers, Cleveland Browns, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Seattle Seahawks are on bye week. So there are going to be quarterbacks that typically start for our teams like a Justin Herbert, who of course are not available to us. So going into this upcoming week, we have the Denver Broncos, of course, still at the top of this conversation in terms of giving up points to opposing quarterbacks. Chicago Bears, Philadelphia Eagles, Los Angeles Chargers, Miami Dolphins. Again, the Chicago Bears tonight, Sam Howell has an opportunity to have himself another big game. They were able to score 30 plus points against the Philadelphia Eagles secondary. Why not against the Chicago Bears? Again, the Los Angeles Rams, they'll take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Besides Sam Howell having himself a huge game, why not Matthew Stafford in the return of Cooper Kupp? With a full healthy offense firing on all cylinders, they should be able to go ahead and find success within the given week. The Miami Dolphins, they take on Daniel Jones. I wouldn't really suggest playing Daniel Jones until they get it right over there. Jordan Love taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Of course, that is an advantageous matchup. Lamar Jackson gets the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is fantastic. Either way, just giving you guys an indication as to some of the more advantageous matchups going into the given week. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have matchups that typically we want to be careful of. Talking about Brock Purdy taking on the Dallas Cowboys, or even the opposite end of that conversation, guys like Dak Prescott taking on the San Francisco 49ers. That game in the playoffs last year was relatively low scoring. If that's going to be the same case once again, could be a struggling overall start. But when you look at the teams that have played against the Dallas Cowboys, week 1, they blew out Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. Most recently, they blew out Mac Jones and the New England Patriots. A lot of inconsistency of quarterback play there, which has obviously given them the advantage. But nonetheless, just giving you guys some representation as to how many fantasy points in regards to passing statistics isolated so that we have all the information so we can make the most informative decisions going into the given week. All right, let's go ahead and begin our top 16 quarterback rankings with our number 1, of course, Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes could have had himself an even better week. Obviously, he slid down at the 5-yard line instead of scoring a rushing touchdown, which absolutely would have elevated his overall play to being a 19-point producer within the given week and a decent play. Unfortunately, he did have himself a couple turnovers early in the game and did struggle, but nonetheless, we could have seen overall upside if it wasn't for the fact that they were trying to knee the clock out and end the game outright. When Patrick Mahomes throughout his entire career has ever had games in which he's thrown 2 interceptions, there have been 10 instances of this, of course, one being just this last week, but in the 9 other instances in which we've seen a follow-up game already, In those games, he's averaging typically 322 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns per game in terms of a revenge game after having a bad week in terms of turning over the ball on multiple occasions. Therefore, I'm expecting a huge bounce back game here for Patrick Mahomes, having an opportunity of taking on the Minnesota Vikings defense, one of the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. A couple weeks ago, Justin Herbert, 40 for 47 passing against that defense for 405 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes should have himself a fantastic game against the 10th easiest matchup at the quarterback position. And considering Vegas's total line is 53 points right now, it's the highest implicated scoring game within the week. Should be a shootout between these two high-powered offenses. Moving on to our number 2, we have Josh Allen. Again, Josh Allen at this current moment in time has been playing incredibly since week 2. Week 1 obviously had himself a lot of turnovers, a lot of mistakes, but since then has really cleaned it up and has been, repping a 77% passing completion percentage over the course of the last 3 games. Specifically, this last game, 21 of 25 passing, an 84 passing completion percentage. I mean, those kind of numbers are very rare, especially for Josh Allen, who at times wants to always make the huge play, but he's been very conservative, and he's obviously been able to benefit, in terms of fantasy football, having scored 5 touchdowns this last week against the Miami Dolphins. I'm expecting another big performance here. The point differential that we've witnessed over the course of the last 3 games, while Josh Allen has played extremely well, has been actually really alarming. The Buffalo Bills are winning 123-33 in their last 3 games of point differential. I expect them to continue their consistency and really put a huge number on this Jacksonville Jaguars secondary. Moving on to our number 3, we have Jalen Hurts. To close out the S tier, again, Jalen Hurts has the privilege of taking on the LA Rams defense. And even though the LA Rams have been playing very well in comparison to last year, especially when we consider the fact that they've lost a lot of pieces within this secondary and this defense, they played very well. Nonetheless, Jalen Hurts has an opportunity of picking up exactly where Anthony Richardson left off last week. Despite the fact that Anthony Richardson was 11 for 25 passing last week, which is a 44% passing completion percentage, he still had himself 200 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 10 rushing attempts for 56 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. And Anthony Richardson finished the fantasy week with 29.6 fantasy points. There is a lot of potential for upside within the given game for Jalen Hurts. He's coming off of the first game of his season with 300 or more passing yards. Last season altogether only had 4 instances in which he surpassed 300 passing yards within the regular season. So I'm expecting him to continue that consistency into the matchup in which he should be running the ball and, of course, dominating through the air. Moving on to the A tier, we begin with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's been playing incredibly, obviously coming off of a game in which he had 4 total touchdowns, 2 on the ground, 2 through the air. Both of those through the air, 2 Mark Andrews, which we'll talk about in just a moment in regards to the tight end section. But the fact of the matter is Lamar Jackson has been the goal line back of this team. In each of the last 2 weeks, 2 rushing touchdowns. Amongst all players in the National Football League, he has the 4th most rushing touchdowns inside the 10-yard line, with 4 of them on 5 total attempts. Even though we believe that Todd Monken would join this organization and really put an influence on passing the ball even more, the fact of the matter is they need to key in on what Lamar Jackson does best, and that's running the ball. There's a reason he has 9+ rushing attempts in each of the last 3 games, and he takes on the 7th best matchup going into the given week, in which we just saw CJ Stroud tear apart this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I'm expecting Lamar Jackson against the division rival to have himself another big game here. Moving on to our number 5, we have Anthony Richardson. Like I mentioned just moments ago with Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson's coming off of a huge game. Even though he had a 44% passing completion percentage, he still finished with over 29 fantasy points, considering his contributions on the ground. Specifically, thus far this season, he already has 4 rushing touchdowns in the 3 games in which he's participated in. Now, when you go ahead and just kind of take a look at the overall rushing utilization that he's had within this offense, it is apparent that they are getting him utilized within design runs. And all 4 of the touchdowns that he has scored this season are quarterback design runs, whether it's a QB counter, a QB power, a QB end around, or a QB draw. All 4 rushing touchdowns that he has scored are designed for him to find the end zone, and they absolutely have found success in those overall opportunities, as Shane Steichen, obviously coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles, has been able to develop and have himself an incredible game. And that's why Anthony Richardson started off so hot this season thus far. Of the 131 rushing yards that he has accumulated, 37 of them are on scrambles and 94 of them are on designed runs. If they continue to give him design runs, he's going to absolutely be an impact player for fantasy purposes, on top of the fact that he has the 11th easiest matchup at the position, taking on the Tennessee Titans funnel of a secondary that obviously many quarterbacks have succeeded against thus far this season. Moving on to our number 6, we have Justin Fields playing tonight against the Washington Commanders. Justin Fields is coming off one of the best games of his career, specifically coming off of a game in which he had 335 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns. If you want to just talk about the career highs that he just set last week, he set a career high in terms of passing completion percentage, 28 of 35 passing. It's an 80% passing completion percentage. He had a career high in passing yardage and passing touchdowns. These are incredible numbers. And it's only going to continue the momentum going into this upcoming matchup against the Washington Commanders, the 12th best matchup at the current position. In fact, the Washington Commanders have allowed 2+ touchdowns to each of the last 3 quarterbacks that they have faced. I am expecting a lot of upside with Justin Fields on Thursday night on a short week against the defense that obviously has not played well thus far this season. Justin Fields has been very consistent in every single season of his career in the idea that he starts slow, but once he finds his footing and finds his stride, he runs away and of course is a top tier quarterback at the position because not only can he get it done on the ground, but of course through the air. Moving on to our number 7, we have Tua Tagovailoa. Tua Tagovailoa really was pressured a lot. I mean, when you take into account, and we mentioned this when I was talking about Tyreek Hill yesterday in the wide receiver rankings video, in week 4 against the Buffalo Bills sacked him 4 times and had 5 quarterback hits and 9 total quarterback hurries. When you go back to weeks 1 through 3, he was only sacked 1 time, he was only hit 3 times total, and only had 22 quarterback hurries. There is a huge difference in terms of the pass rush that the Buffalo Bills and the pressure and the blitz that they were sending in the direction of Tua Tagovailoa. And obviously, Teron Armstead, their starting left tackle, not being in the game and being injured, certainly made a huge difference. But going into this upcoming weekend's game against the New York Giants, there should be a one-sided affair here where the New York Giants defense isn't going to be able to get to Tua. And when he has time in the pocket and he's comfortable, he should be able to deliver the ball down the field. Again, in the last 3 games, he has a 76% passing completion percentage. He's going to dice up these defenses and continue to find success as a quarterback. I mean, just looking at his overall next-gen stat, distribution of opportunities, a lot of his passes behind the line of scrimmage, because just like Kyle Shanahan does, and now Mike McDaniel, a former, coach within that coaching tree, they want to get their players the ball early and allow them to make plays after the catch so they can continue to elevate Tua Tagovailoa and his overall contributions. All right, moving on to number 8, we have Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins had a very underwhelming game. Only threw the ball 19 total times, 12 completions, only had 2 passing touchdowns. Obviously threw a huge pick 6 within that game. And it was a struggle for the offense as a whole going up against the Carolina Panthers secondary, who has played very well this season despite the absence of J.C. Horn. If and when he comes back, that is going to be a very tough secondary to play against every single week. Nonetheless, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, there's a cold hard truth here. There is a 53-point total based on what Vegas expects to see. So the implicated total of points expects this game to be a shootout. On top of the fact that the Minnesota Vikings secondary can be taken advantage of, Patrick Mahomes coming off of a bad game will probably light up this defense, and it'll force Kirk Cousins to abandon the run game and have to throw for majority of the contest. And of course, when he does so, and he has done so many of times already this season, he finds a lot of fantasy upside within a given week. Moving on to our number 9, we have Jordan Love. Jordan Love, again, takes on the Las Vegas Raiders. Like we mentioned earlier, it's the 6th easiest matchup at the position. They're allowing over 16 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And each quarterback that they have faced thus far this season, they have allowed a minimum of 2 touchdowns to. So Jordan Love is going to be in a fantastic position. Even though he struggled mightily in the first half of the last 2 games, he has put together some garbage time performances, which are very reminiscent of Blake Bortles back in 2015, where he didn't do anything in the first half, but in the second half, whether it's on the ground or through the air, is finding himself a lot of success. I'm expecting Jordan Love to continue his string of consistency here. Thus far this season, he is ranked individually in each week in the standard 4-point per passing touchdown format as quarterback 3, 16, 6, and 14. Again, he is in this conversation with an advantageous matchup, should be able to ball out with Christian Watson and, of course, Aaron Jones and Luke Musgrave at a full capacity. All 3 were either limited or injured last week. Moving on to our number 10, we have CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud, again, has shown poise in the pocket, regardless of the fact that he has had a 2nd/3rd string offensive line. He's been able to sit in the pocket and deliver balls down the field, coming off of a week in which he had 306 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. The expectation was that the pass rush would get to him, and quite frankly, at times it did. But ultimately, it did not matter. He was able to strike down the field and find himself a lot of success in the overall opportunities. And the fact of the matter is, there is a high likelihood that Titus Howard, the starting right tackle, and Laramie Tunsil, the starting left tackle, will be returning. And both these guys are going to make a huge impact on the potential upside of CJ Stroud, who has had himself 20-plus fantasy points in each of the last 3 games he has played, with a minimum of 2 passing touchdowns and 280 passing yards in each of those games. He has yet to throw an interception thus far this season, and he is already setting records that he's pretty much amongst Andrew Luck and Cam Newton. He has the 2nd most passing yards by a rookie quarterback in the first 4 games of a season, only behind Cam Newton and just ahead of Andrew Luck in that overall capacity, with 1,212 passing yards thus far this season, the 3rd most passing attempts amongst all quarterbacks in the league right now. They're on fire, taking on the Atlanta Falcons. I expect nothing but success for CJ Stroud. Our number 11, the Angry Bird himself, it is Sam Howell. Sam Howell takes on the Chicago Bears. Like we mentioned earlier, It is one of the easiest matchups at the position, to say the very least, the second easiest to be specific. They're allowing 19.88 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks in terms of passing statistics alone. We have already seen quarterbacks by the name of Patrick Mahomes, Jordan Love, and even Russell Wilson all throw for 3+ passing touchdowns against this defense. Even Baker Mayfield had 300+ passing yards and a touchdown against this defense. So thus far this season, everyone has found success. Why not Sam Howell? A quarterback who's been able to accumulate 15+ fantasy points in 3 of his 4 contests already this season. There is a lot of hope for upside within the passing game. On top of the fact that already thus far this season, there's been a game in week 1 in which he's had a rushing touchdown. Most recently in week 4 against the Philadelphia Eagles, had himself 40 rushing yards. If he's able to accumulate all the passing statistics that we expect, on top of the fact that he's able to get it done on the ground, Sam Howell has a lot of upside within the given week. Moving on, we have our number 12, Trevor Lawrence. I do worry about Trevor Lawrence a lot because he really is beginning to settle for the check down plays. He's becoming the next check down king, whether he's throwing the ball to Evan Engram, Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne, and that really is damaging his overall upside within given games. He only has 4 passing touchdowns in 4 games, and luckily he was able to bail himself out this last week against the Atlanta Falcons, having himself 42 rushing yards. But oftentimes you're not going to be able to accumulate that at the quarterback position, especially in the way that they utilize Trevor Lawrence within this offense. So we're hoping that there's going to be a situation here where against the Buffalo Bills, considering Tre'Davious White is out, they may get Zay Jones back within the lineup for the Jaguars. They'll be firing on all cylinders. They'll be in London for another consecutive week, comfortable within the stadium, within the entire environment, and hopefully start out hot. Otherwise, there could be a lot of garbage time plays for Trevor Lawrence that he'll have to make. But as you guys can see from the chart on screen, his overall passing completions are very close to the line of scrimmage. Like I said, he's a check down king, and that is apparent. Moving on to our number 13, we have Joshua Dobbs. Joshua Dobbs has played incredibly well, coming off of a week against the San Francisco 49ers defense in which he had 23.4 fantasy points, 265 and 2 passing touchdowns through the air, 12 rushing attempts for 48 rushing yards, and those rushing yardage, totals are not actually rare. He's been able to accumulate 40 or more rushing yards in each of the last 3 games minimum. Therefore, we're anticipating at least a touchdown of production via the ground, if not even more if he's able to find the end zone with his rushing overall utilization, on top of the fact that he is ranked as the number 6, 4, and 16 overall quarterback in the last 3 games against the New York Giants, Dallas Cowboys, and San Francisco 49ers, 2 of those defenses which are not a joke. So going into this upcoming week against the Cincinnati Bengals, considering how much the Bengals offense has struggled, there is going to be opportunities for turnovers, a lot of 3-and-out scenarios in which Joshua Dobbs and this Cardinals offense will continue to fire on all cylinders and find themselves a lot of fantasy success. Moving on to our number 14, we have Matthew Stafford. Thus far this season, Matthew Stafford looks like, the 2021 version of himself. And now that we have a potential in which Cooper Kupp is returning, whether or not he does, this is going to be a pass-heavy offense, primarily because of the matchup going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. They are really stout in terms of stopping the run, and additionally have struggled against opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers thus far this season. So whether or not Cooper Kupp is available, Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell, Tyler Higbee, they'll be able to take advantage of the opportunity on hand. But as long as they can continue to keep Matthew Stafford upright and healthy, that is going to be the biggest difference maker, because we know that pass rush for the Philadelphia Eagles certainly is going to play a big overall role within this game. The Rams have allowed Matthew Stafford to be sacked 9 times in the last 2 games. You have to keep him upright, and if in fact they're able to do so, and Cooper Kupp is returning, there could be a huge game here where the number 14 ranking is a bit of a disservice to his overall contribution within the given week. Moving on, let's talk about our number 15, Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, as you guys can see from the chart, was quite literally 20 of 21 passing. Only had 1 incompletion, and look at how many times he was throwing the ball deep down the field and still making these completions with Brandon Ayuk. The fact that he had a 95.24% passing completion percentage is unbelievable. He had himself a passing touchdown, he had himself a rushing touchdown, and ultimately, taking on the Dallas Cowboys, it is going to be a difficult matchup between these 2 great teams. And last time we saw Brock Purdy take on this defense in the NFL playoffs, he had 214 passing yards, over a 60% passing completion percentage, but 0 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, was quite, underwhelming within that overall game. A very low scoring game, yet they were still able to pull out a victory. The expectation is, if in fact we have a full healthy Deebo Samuel, there should be a great week on the horizon for Brock Purdy, considering how efficient he has been and the fact that he's just throwing the ball to his overall receiving threats, and they are making plays after the catch on a consistent basis, regardless of whether it is deep down the field or behind the line of scrimmage. Moving on to the final quarterback I wanted to mention, it is Jared Goff. The only reason Jared Goff sits here is because there is an expectation that Amon-Ra St. Brown could potentially miss. He did not participate in Wednesday or Thursday's practice. That is very worrisome. So if in fact you're taking on the Carolina Panthers, which is one of the best, if not the best, potential running back opportunities in terms of matchups. The Carolina Panthers allowing over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs in terms of rushing statistics alone. This is a little bit of a revenge game, and if in fact the Lions want to continue to just bash this defense, it's going to be done on the ground. Now, specifically, if Jared Goff does have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Sam LaPorta ready to go, he should be a better play than number 16 overall. But I will say, this is going to be a definite revenge game in which last season the Carolina Panthers, they mollywopped the Detroit Lions 37-23, and that was the primary reason that the Lions did not make the playoffs. I'm sure that is being echoed within the entire organization right now. But on top of the fact that Jared Goff has himself this, extra motivation, it is a tough matchup. That secondary for the Carolina Panthers have played very well against opposing quarterbacks, whether it's Kirk Cousins last week, Derek Carr a couple weeks back. A lot of these quarterbacks have struggled against the secondary, so don't be surprised if Jared Goff unfortunately falls victim to that as well. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Before we get into the tight end conversation, specifically with matchups, let me remind you guys, if you haven't checked out the 1.01 brand, the official merchandise line of the Andrew Kirchhoff YouTube channel, be sure to do so today. At this current moment in time, we're offering free shipping for the remainder of the season, thanks to all the support you guys have already shown. So again, if you're trying to find yourself high quality, stylish, and comfortable clothing for your most stressful of upcoming fantasy football Sundays and want to rep the channel and support the channel, be sure to check out the link down in the description, sending you on over to andrewkirchhoffshop.com. Greatly appreciate the support. All right, let's get into talking about the tight end matchups. As you guys can see, there are very few matchups in which we can truly take advantage of, primarily because the tight end position just doesn't score very many points. So when we have an opportunity of taking on the New York Jets defense, again, that's going to be a great opportunity for nobody, unfortunately, because the Denver Broncos don't have a tight end that they utilize on a weekly basis. But the Philadelphia Eagles matchup could bode well for Tyler Higbee. The Detroit Lions, Hayden Hurst, can we trust him? Not really. The Denver Broncos matchup, I guess Tyler Conklin had himself a pretty decent week last week. Could he potentially be in line for another uptick of overall opportunity? The Cincinnati Bengals matchup, of course, we talked about Zach Ertz on our waiver wire episode. He needs to be rostered. I don't know why he isn't. He's going to have himself a great game. But nonetheless, we'll refer back to these statistics. Just wanted to go ahead and show you some of the more advantageous matchups going into the given week. Some of the more disadvantageous matchups, specifically the Washington Commanders matchup. When you look at the teams that they have played against, very few of them really like to utilize the tight end position. I know that they just went against the Philadelphia Eagles, but the Dallas Goedert has pretty much been super quiet thus far this season. So is it much of a surprise that the Washington Commanders haven't given up many points to opposing tight ends thus far this season? That all being said, of course, the Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, New Orleans Saints, New England Patriots, these are teams that consistently play well against the opposing tight end position. Again, the fact that a lot of these teams haven't allowed a touchdown to a single tight end thus far this season just speaks not to how good they have played, but how few of tight ends we have seen this season actually find themselves in the end zone. There have been very few of those overall opportunities, and because of that, we continue to struggle at the position. But that's why I'm here today. I'm here to go ahead, guide you in the right direction in regards to these tight ends, and we'll begin by talking about our top 16, beginning with our number 1, Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce has 3 consecutive weeks of 8 or more targets. He's been averaging 12 fantasy points per game this season, and even though that is not up to the standard of Travis Kelce, when you go back and look at the games during the regular season in which Travis Kelce has played with Patrick Mahomes since 2020, in games in which he's getting 8 or more targets, he's typically averaging over 15 fantasy points per game. So we're going to start to see the uptake, especially in a high-scoring shootout matchup against the Minnesota Vikings defense. I'm expecting a lot of upside for Travis Kelce. Like we talked about earlier in the week, even though the Minnesota Vikings give up a lot of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, there aren't any wide receivers that we can rely upon within the given matchup to take advantage of it for the Kansas City Chiefs. That primary wide receiver, that's going to be Travis Kelce for this week. Moving on to number 2, we have Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews coming off of a huge week, 22.5 fantasy points, 2 receiving touchdowns, a great overall performance. This upcoming week, he takes on a division rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense has been extremely inconsistent. On top of the fact that they just got blown out this last week, Dalton Schultz had himself 3 catches, 40 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. We're hoping for something of that line from Mark Andrews. The last time he took on the Pittsburgh Steelers, week 17 of last year, with Tyler Huntley at quarterback, he accumulated 9 targets, 9 receptions, and 100 receiving yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I'm expecting for more upside for him within the given week. I'm just hoping for just more of an expansion of overall targets. When they bring back Odell Beckham Jr., Rashad Bateman from injury, it'll only open up this offense even more for Mark Andrews to have himself more opportunity. But majority of last week consisted of Mark Andrews lining up in the inline and having to potentially chip Myles Garrett for majority of those overall reps, because again, the primary overall objective is to make sure that you have Lamar Jackson upright so he can deliver those passes down the field. Moving on to our number 3, we have TJ Hockenson. He had himself a relatively underwhelming week, only 2 receptions on 3 targets. Like we've mentioned in the past, since joining the Minnesota Vikings, in 11 of his last 15 games, that's 73%, he's been able to see 8 or more targets. So I would say that this, most recent performance is quite anomalous. You only see it 1 out of every 4 games, and quite frankly, thus far this season, only 1 out of 4 games. So now that we get back on track, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs defense, who are the 10th best matchup at the position, giving 9.75 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, the 53-point total that I mentioned on multiple occasions already thus far today, this should be a shootout. I'm expecting a lot of production, especially considering the fact that the New York Jets tight ends last week on Sunday Night Football were able to accumulate 7 receptions, 85 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. That's a total of 18 fantasy points from that tight end group. I'm hoping for TJ Hockenson to have himself just as much upside as that group did last week against this defense. Moving on, let's talk about Sam LaPorta, our number 4. Sam LaPorta has been playing extremely well. Thus far this season, in individual weeks in a half PPR scoring format, he is ranked as tight end 1, 11, 8, and 16. Relatively consistent, has always been in the top 16 conversation. And considering Amon-Ra St. Brown has missed already Wednesday and Thursday practice of this week, there is potential for even more target ceiling for Sam LaPorta. If he can get himself into that double-digit target conversation once again in an advantageous matchup against the Carolina Panthers, I know that the Carolina Panthers locked down TJ Hockenson last week, but there's going to be an emphasis on being able to stop the run against the Detroit Lions. And if they're not able to, of course, it'll force a lot of play action opportunity for Sam LaPorta down the field to find himself a lot of success. Moving on to our number 5, the check down king, Evan Engram. In each of the last 3 games, he has seen 8 targets minimum. That is a great number to say the very least. Specifically, he is ranked as a top 10 tight end in every single week of this season. The consistency that Evan Engram has provided has been incredible. And it's all thanks to Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, of course, like we mentioned earlier, when I showed his quarterback chart and all the passing attempts he had against the Atlanta Falcons, majority of his passes or within 0 to 10 yards down the field. Very seldom is he pushing the ball deep down the field, and especially considering he takes on the Buffalo Bills, this may be another game in which he's trying to get the ball out of his hands quickly and look at the direction of Evan Engram, which we're expecting probably another game in which he has 6 catches, over 50 receiving yards, and another fantastic overall fantasy contributing week. Unfortunately, isn't really getting much utilization down in the red zone, but considering he's a tight end, any fantasy points that we'll get, we're happy with. I'm not even complaining. Moving on to our number 6, we have Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert has been relatively underwhelming this season, to say the very least. He does take on the LA Rams. Last week, the LA Rams defense allowed 6 catches, 107 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns to Indianapolis Colts tight ends. There is a potential in which Dallas Goedert could see himself a little bit more utilization within the offense. Earlier this week on Monday, head coach Nick Sirianni specifically was asked why isn't Dallas Goedert getting enough utilization. He basically responded saying that he's still in the plan. Certain circumstances have obviously led to the fact that he isn't getting as many targets as we have seen in the past, but he's in the plan. And considering it's a great matchup, I'm anticipating him to, of course, have himself potentially an upside week. It's just a matter of, does Jalen Hurts look in this direction within the given week? Last time he had himself a dud performance in week 1. In week 2, immediately had 6 receptions. So I'm hoping for an uptick here in week 5. Moving on to our number 7, we have Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz takes on the Cincinnati Bengals. Thus far this season, the Bengals have allowed the following statistics to opposing tight ends. Against Cleveland, 5 catches, 41 and a touchdown. Against Baltimore, 6 catches, 53 and a touchdown. Against Tennessee, 5 catches, 55 and a touchdown. And against the LA Rams, 5 catches for 71. There has been a lot of fantasy points accumulated against the Cincinnati Bengals defense by opposing tight ends. And even though Zach Ertz wasn't able to haul in a garbage time touchdown this last week, he is still number 2 in tight end targets, number 4 in tight end receptions overall, and number 12 in tight end receiving yards. I'm expecting another big week here for Zach Ertz, and hopefully he finds the end zone. On number 8 is Tyler Higbee. Takes on the Philadelphia Eagles, the second best matchup at the position. They're allowing 13.1 fantasy points per game. Majority of those contributions are from Hunter Henry in week 1 and TJ Hockenson in week 2. But considering Tyler Higbee is coming off of a season-high 11 targets this last week against the Indianapolis Colts, and that there is a potential in which Cooper Kupp does not even play in the given game, there is an opportunity for Tyler Higbee to have himself another big performance. If, in fact, Cooper Kupp still plays, there's still a chance. We have seen Cooper Kupp and, of course, Robert Woods and even Tyler Higbee in the past all coexist within this offense and all find themselves great overall production within a given week. So why not Kupp, Puka, and Higbee within the given week against a secondary that has really struggled for the Philadelphia Eagles thus far this season? Moving on to our number 9, we have Jake Ferguson. Jake Ferguson coming off a week in which he had 7 targets, 7 receptions, 77 receiving yards. He is still within the top of the conversation in terms of total red zone targets amongst all players in the National Football League. But in the last 3 games, he has had himself a minimum of 7 targets in each of those contests. On top of the fact that his overall A-dot average depth of target is increasing and they're getting him more involved within this offense, taking on the 49ers may seem like a difficult matchup, but when you go back to the last 2 games in which the Dallas Cowboys have played against his defense, in both games, we saw a high utilization of opportunity from Dalton Schultz, 7 catches for 89, 5 catches for 27 and a touchdown. I'm expecting Jake Ferguson to be utilized heavily within the given matchup. Moving on to the other side of this matchup, we have George Kittle, who is unfortunately, kind of fell down to the D tier. Thus far this season, outside of one good performance against the New York Giants, where Brandon Ayuk was out for that game, and luckily, George Kittle was able to get himself 5 targets, 5 catches for 95 receiving yards. Outside of that one singular game, the rest of his overall performances look like 3.4, 4.5, and 1.4 fantasy points. Brandon Ayuk's healthy. Deebo Samuel is expected to be healthy. And if George Kittle isn't able to get himself a high volume of overall targets within this offense, we shouldn't really expect much. I'm hoping that he'll find success within the given week. As I'm sure it is for you, it's difficult to trust him at this current moment in time, but we're hoping for a bounce back week against the Cowboys defense. Moving on to our number 11. Speaking of hard to trust, as of right now, Darren Waller has been just mediocre to say the very least. And it's not really just Darren Waller's fault. It's the quarterback's fault. It's the offensive line's fault. It's the play caller's fault. All 3 of those, Daniel Jones, the offensive line not having, Andrew Thomas, their left tackle, their best offensive lineman, available because he's been injured. The fact that Saquon's not been there. Mike Kafka isn't getting enough involvement out of Darren Waller. They didn't trade for him to utilize him like Daniel Bellinger, yet they are. They're making him chip block on the line of scrimmage because their offensive line cannot stop the pass rush. That is an awful way to utilize Darren Waller. Nonetheless, he takes on Miami. It's one of the better matchups at the position. Miami gave up 5 catches, 42 and a touchdown to the LA Chargers, 11 catches for 85 and a touchdown against the New England Patriots, and 5 catches for 39 against the Buffalo Bills this last week. There is an expectation for upside. Hopefully, Darren Waller can meet it within the given week. Let's move on to our number 12, Cole Kmet. It is a difficult matchup, but like I mentioned earlier, the Washington Commanders haven't really played very many good tight ends. They played against the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos tight end scored 0 points because they had 0 receptions within the given week. Not a surprise. Greg Dulcich is on the injured reserve. Buffalo Bills tight ends against this defense, 3 catches for 14. Again, Kincaid, Dawson Knox have been relatively underwhelming this season, to say the least. Philadelphia tight ends this last week, 2 catches for 25. Like I mentioned already, Dallas Goedert has not been very consistent in comparison to last year. So when we go ahead and take all that into account, and the fact that Justin Fields is expected to have a big game tonight, throughout majority of the games last year in which Justin Fields was having those upside weeks from weeks 5 through 17, of course, Cole Kmet was always a danger to have himself an upside performance and obviously find himself in the end zone. We're hoping for that to be the case tonight in a high-scoring event. Moving on to our number 13, Hunter Henry. Speaking of finding himself in the end zone, unfortunately has not been able to do so in each of the last 2 weeks, but luckily has had himself 50-plus receiving yards in 3 out of the last 4 games, which has pretty much kept him above water. Taking on the New Orleans Saints is a difficult matchup at times, and regardless of whether it's going to be Bailey Zappi or Mac Jones, I don't really care who plays quarterback, as long as they, potentially target him on a consistent basis, great. The biggest difficulty for Hunter Henry getting targets on a consistent basis is the fact that Mike Gesicki obviously is still within this lineup and hauling in a fair share of targets himself, which is obviously hurting the overall upside of Henry. But considering they've been in negative game scripts for majority of the season, the expectation is that they'll be throwing for majority of this game and finding success. There have only been 3 teams this season that scored 20 or fewer points in every single game. New England Patriots are one of those offenses, so let's hope they have some upside in the given week. Moving on to our number 14, Dalton Kincaid. This was the first time last week in which Dalton Kincaid outsnapped Dawson Knox within the offense. Additionally, this is a second consecutive week in which he had more total targets within the offense. The expectation going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have given up their fair share of points to opposing tight ends. Last week, 8 catches and 116 to Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts. We saw the Houston Texans tight ends accumulate 3 catches for 22 and a touchdown. Kansas City tight ends, 7 catches, 64 and a touchdown. Colts tight ends, 5 catches for 59. This is a good matchup. If Dalton Kincaid can't get it done this week, then I don't know. I mean, at that point, then he's probably just a sit for the remainder of the year until he finally finds himself his stride. Moving on to our number 15, we have Tyler Conklin. Tyler Conklin was utilized heavily, 6 targets, 4 catches, 58 yards. The expectation for this week is for him to get himself more opportunity, considering this is the 4th best matchup at the tight end position, with Zach Wilson finding himself some success and, of course, potential consistency. Hopefully, he'll transition that into the given matchup against the Denver Broncos defense, a revenge game for this Jets offense. The final player I wanted to mention is Kyle Pitts. quite frankly, I'd feel more comfortable starting Jonnu Smith at this point. So I'm going to put Kyle Pitts here, and I'm only going to talk about Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith's coming off a week in which he had 6 catches for 95 receiving yards. In fact, in the last 3 games, he has pretty much outscored overall Kyle Pitts in terms of total fantasy points and has out-targeted him 20-18. There has been a conscious effort to just continue to give the ball to Jonnu Smith. We know he's a talented player. We know that he has a rapport with Arthur Smith back in the days when they were both with the Tennessee Titans. But the fact that Kyle Pitts is not seeing enough targets is absolutely ridiculous. So probably just end up starting Jonnu Smith because that'll probably find more success within the given week. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you everybody for watching. Until next time, of course, tomorrow we'll be talking about rest of season rankings for all 4 primary positions, rest of season strength of schedule, Saturday afternoon live stream at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll have a live stream on Sunday morning starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we'll also have a live stream later tonight after the Thursday Night Football game. Thank you everybody for watching. Click the like button, subscribe if you haven't yet already. And of course, check out Underdog Fantasy, use code Andrew. I appreciate the support. Check out the merch, link down in the description. Outside of that, until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.